everybody, and welcome to the History of Diving Museum. For those of you, we're going to take a show of hands. I asked a little bit earlier, how many are here for the first time? Wow, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much. We generally get between 20 and 25,000 visitors every year to come to the Keys and who celebrate, and we say don't drive by, dive in to the History of Diving Museum. It's a wide variety from all over the states, as well as last year we had 88 different countries that came. So we appreciate you coming in and not only spending time while you're here in the Keys, as well as if you're a local coming back. We have several members that are here tonight. We have board members that are here. We could not do this without a whole team coming together. So, on that note, if any of you are in town or coming back to town, or any of our Zoom attendees, we do have some volunteer opportunities. Some of them can be one and done, maintenance things. A lot of times people come in for the winter and they miss that garage at home, which we love because we got a great workshop and we always have projects that need to get done. So reach out, director@divingmuseum.org, and I'll put you in touch with our volunteer coordinator. For those of you, again, thank you to our staff and our members and our volunteers. Tonight is sponsored by the Monroe County Tourist Development Council. They help us put on the featured exhibits twice a year. We just closed the Dive into Art, Stories from the Sea. And tonight was our grand opening, our ribbon cutting for Prescribed Pressure, Undersea Medicine and Beyond. And a lot of people, for those of you who aren't here on site and watching this through a YouTube or attending, we're open daily 10 to 5, and the exhibit will be open until December 31st. So we invite you to come down and learn about the history of hyperbaric medicine that really goes back to the 1600s. Of course, not all of it worked really well, but at least you have to start someplace, and we appreciate what our early pioneers have done. Next month, we're going to learn about the 10-year anniversary of Force Blue. There are a bunch of special operations who now Force Blue, they come down to the Keys, they do different environmental missions around the country. They're going to be talking to us next month on the third Wednesday in June. And tonight we have Dr. Matías Nochetto, as well as Cliff Richardson from DAN, Divers Alert Network. And they're going to talk about where dive safety has come for the last 45 years. And it's a resource for any diver locally, whether you travel internationally, whether you just dive in that lake or that quarry at home, whether you come down to the Keys, or whether you travel internationally. But they are the safety resource for divers, and we appreciate it, and we look forward to learning more about what you are doing. So on everybody's seat tonight, you have the nice little stickers, which gives you the Divers Alert Network number. If a diver is in trouble, they call that number, and we'll find out what that number will do for us, what the other end of the operator. For those of you who like to use your cell phones, now would be a good time to take it out and look at it and maybe silence it, because for the next hour we're up to and learn more about Divers Alert Network. For those of you that are on our YouTube, feel free to let us know where you're from, how many people are with your group, as well as if you have any questions. Julia will be moderating tonight, and she'll be bringing those questions in so that we can answer them for our community.
Awesome. Thank you.
So thank you all very much, and we're happy that you're here tonight.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So let me just get this off the bat. The hotline number, we don't want to hear from you. Okay? Just call us in any other number, not on that one. All right, so I'm going to be trying to explain to you, walk you through our history, where we come from, what we are, and hopefully, I think you did a fantastic job in explaining what we do, but let me see if I can get a little bit further from that. So a little bit about myself. So I'm the Executive Vice President of Global Medical Affairs. I have the privilege, the honor, and ultimately the responsibility of leading the medical aspects at DAN. And for a good number of years, I led the hotline, which is something that I'm learning to, relegate to somebody else. And yeah, it's given me some peace of mind to be able to live without my phone tied to me 24/7. Now, as you can tell, we are in North Carolina, and as you can tell, I do have an accent. So many of you are probably wondering, where's this guy from? So I was born and raised here in Argentina. And you guys live in a fantastic place where diving is here. And many of you probably were born in places where you can dive. Argentina is not known for great diving. So this is Buenos Aires. It's a lovely city. If you ever go there, by all means, enjoy it. And so we're known for tango, right? We're known for great wines. We're known for these, right? Yeah, great beef. So I'm essentially carnivore. Occasionally I do eat fish, but yes, to me, if it has a pulse, it's food. So my history is the gentleman you see there, that was my great-grandfather. He was the first Italian diver in the Argentine Navy. You can tell by, again, my last name, Italian. There's Argentina, it's a bunch of Italians speaking Spanish. Yeah. So he actually helped build this Navy base in Patagonia. So my story is I wanted to become a diver when I was 12 years old, but there was no training agencies in Argentina. It was only CMAS, the French Confederation. And when I was 12, they said, no, kid, you're too young. Get lost. Come back when you're 18. So when I went into med school the first year, I wanted to resume that idea of, becoming a diver. And the first day in the diving class, the instructor was going through respiratory physiology, cardiovascular system. I was like, oh my God, I can't move away from medicine. But immediately I fell in love because I could combine what I was learning in med school with diving class and, contribute in both sides. Eventually, during the career, I became an instructor in 1999. So I did my studies at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina from those years. I finished my training in this hospital. And eventually, I had to decide what to do with my life, if continue diving and give away medicine or the other way around. And I wasn't ready to do that. So I went to Mexico City and I spent 3 years there training in hyperbaric and diving medicine, which was the only thing that could justify keeping a foot both in diving and in medicine. So I trained in that hospital. In 2001, I wanted to participate in one of Dan's continuing medical education programs. And this was right after 9/11. And one of the doctors that was going to give a talk, she couldn't fly because of restrictions. So they asked me to give one of the talks. And that is what opened my doors to Dan. That's how I came to know Dan. So the CEO of Dan at the time, Dr. Peter Bennett, he thanked me for the talk and he eventually invited me to be part of it. So I've been a contractor for Dan since those years. And eventually I moved to Durham in 2007. So during my winters, when I was training as a diver and as a doctor, my life was this. And during the summers, my life was this. Now, I don't know if you can find me there, but I swear I'm one of those. Can you find me there? Yes. Yeah. Upright. Yeah. So that is a younger version of me. Yeah.
Serious looking.
Yeah. This year, I have one of those faces that unless I'm smiling, people think that I'm pissed. Okay. So that is in Brazil. I used to work as a diving instructor during the summers in Brazil, 7 consecutive summers. So again, so the guy in the white t-shirt, that is actually my brother, and the lady right next to him, that is now his wife. So yeah, so we always say at Dan, we are divers helping divers. I rest my case. So yeah, those were happier times. So and then during the winter, I was training again in the hospital. So what you see there, that is a hyperbaric medicine center. I was talking with you earlier today about, hyperbaric medicine. And hyperbaric medicine is a field of medicine, it's a discipline, it's a therapy. And diving is actually one of those indications. Hyperbaric medicine is a spin-off of diving medicine. When we were treating divers, there were some effects that we could not explain. And that gave birth to, let's research this. And now that became a whole new area. So out of 14 indications in the US for hyperbaric medicine, only 2 are diving. The rest have nothing to do with diving. So what you're going to find in the US, if you ever visit a hyperbaric medicine center, is something like that. And those apparatuses there, those are hyperbaric chambers. They're not always, a steel tank. Those are monoplace units. And there's a big controversy in the US that people think that in a monoplace unit, you cannot treat a diver. So these are the patients we were treating in that monoplace unit. These are burned patients. 80% of their bodies were burned. If you can treat someone that's serious, that's sick in a monoplace chamber, of course you can treat a diver. Most cases of decompression sickness are mild. And mild cases, you can treat it pretty much anywhere, okay? Now, that is a monoplace unit. Again, that's a younger version of me with a baby. That's a 6-month-old baby that had a motor vehicle accident, and we were trying to use the chamber for something that was not intended to, but it was a heroic resource because the pressure in her skull was increasing and there was no way to bring it down. So, we're treating this baby, and again, the younger version of me. Now, in 2017, eventually, I moved to the US in 2007, like I said, and in 2017, I became a US citizen, and this is me coming out of the oath. Now, these are difficult times. I've been using this slide because I find it funny, but again, this is not to make a political statement. Okay? Yeah. I mean, I always say, if anybody talks about it here, talking about politics, we're going to switch to religion. We're going to be better off. All right, so let's go to what we came here for. So recreational diving became popular probably in the 50s, right? In the US, mostly here in Florida, in California and Hawaii. And in the US, the reason for why it became popular was there was a surplus of military equipment that got into the hands of civilians. So, initially with Cousteau and Gagnon in France and Italy, it spread over Europe, in the United States here. So you see now we was founded in 1960, PADI in 66, in Australia, pretty much about the same time. And so back in those days, when somebody would get bent, things were not very different than what they're now, right? So you don't learn diving medicine in med school, right? So I moved to Mexico to learn hyperbaric medicine. But during the career, I wasn't being taught about anything diving medicine-wise. And it makes sense. I mean, you have to prioritize what you're going to be learning. Chances of a doctor ever seeing a diver are small. So you have to prioritize what you teach them, because otherwise you can't know everything. So when somebody would get bent, nobody knew exactly what to do, but there was always someone that knew someone. So there was always someone said, you got to call this guy. So let me walk you through that history. So when we say there was someone that knew someone, in 1964, Dr. Jefferson Davis, he was at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. He had a phone line, which was known by the industry as the Leo Fast line. So you may wonder, what was Leo Fast? It was just a sequence of numbers in the dial pad. So when somebody was bent, say in California, I say, well, we need to put him to a chamber. So what? A chamber. So where's that? I don't know, but let's call the Leo Fast. So they were calling a US, an Air Force base. And because it was a military unit, they have a database with all the chambers in the country. And because it was aviation medicine, they know about decompression sickness, because aviators can have decompression sickness too. So the doctors, or whomever was on the field, was relating what was going on with this diver to Dr. Jeff Davis, and Dr. Jeff Davis was giving them information back and eventually telling them what to do and where to go. So in a way, we can say that was the predecessor of the Dan hotline. Okay. Now in 1974, the US was going through an oil embargo, and that drew attention to the need to improve medical support for commercial divers. Commercial diving these days is very safe. It wasn't the same scenario back then. And when you have a bunch of divers that are taking care of an oil rig that is supposed to extract oil, to produce energy, to make the country run, and if these divers get sick, there's no production, and then the economy crashes. So we needed to support divers, commercial divers, to get back on their feet, and eventually, to prevent them from getting sick. So Dr. Jeff Davis, he organized a task force. So he was tasked with organizing a task force, and he actually gathered experts from many different areas, and they developed what they called, with this flamboyant name, the National Plan for the Safety and Health of Divers in their Quest for Subsea Energy. So they put together this plan with Dr. Charles Schilling. Dr. Schilling was the executive director of the UMS, the Undersea Medical Society. Now is the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society, but you can see that before it was only dive medicine, not hyperbaric medicine. Now, when he put together this plan, there was no mandate to action. So he finished it and said, so what do I do with this now? Just keep it. Eventually, the time will come. So in 1976, again, the government drew attention to diving. And this is when Dr. Schilling said, hey, Jeff, why don't we dust off this plan we put a couple of years ago and we present it again? So they gathered Jeff Davis, James Miller from NOAA, Morgan Wells from NOAA, and they submitted this plan to the Department of Energy. And the three-part plan was, the first one was to develop a pool of physicians trained in diving medicine. Because like I said, we don't learn diving medicine in med school. So this is what ended up being the NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA Physicians course. So up until 2018, when that course was phased out, this was the gold standard to train doctors in diving medicine. Part two of that plan was to address the need for training DMTs, diving medical technicians. So diving medical technician is the guy that is going to be running the chamber, spinning knobs and eventually pressurizing you and unpressurizing you safely. And also is the guy that is inside the chamber tending to the injured diver. All right, so part two was to address the need and set the standards on how are we going to train these guys? What do they need to know? So that is what ended up turning out into that mouthful, the NBDHMT, which is the National Board for Diving and Hyperbaric Medical Technology, still running these days. Part three of that plan was to establish the requirements for what they call the National Diving Accident Network. Can you see it? So NADAN.
There you go.
So drop the national, change accident for alert, kaboom, right? And in the words of Dr. Morgan Wells, this National Diving Accident Network should work as a poison control center for divers. So a place where people could call the same way you do with a poison control center. You just call and you say, listen, my kid swallowed this. What should I do? Well, tell me, what do you find here? How is he there? Blah, 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 questions back and forth. And eventually, well, this is what you need to do. So what Dan does is essentially the same thing, not for poisons, but for diving injuries. Okay? So in 1977, they submitted this proposal to NOAA, and it was accepted in 79. And because Dr. Jeff Davis was already doing something very similar, they said, listen, Jeff, or Dr. Davis, you should be doing this. And Dr. Davis said, listen, I'm flattered. This is great, but I'm about to retire. And he had some plans, some personal commitments. And he said, I don't think I'm the best one to do it. I think actually the best one to do it would be Dr. Peter Bennett at Duke University in North Carolina. So why Dr. Peter Bennett? Dr. Bennett was an English physiologist that came to the US in the 60s, and he was doing experimental research. They had a fantastic setup, a saturation system, a bunch of multiple chambers, 7 chambers interconnected, and they were doing research, trying to see essentially how deep we can put a human being and eventually bring them back to surface alive. Why? Well, we had to research on the commercial diving industry to make it safer, but also we were after the Cold War. So we had reasons to see what we could do, right? So they said, Dr. Bennett, he says that you should. Oh, rats. Okay, well, I'll do it. So in January 1981, NOAA and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, they awarded Dr. Bennett a 2-year startup grant of $269,000. So they said, your task is to develop this 24/7 emergency hotline, this poison control center for divers. So this is how Dan came to be, right? With that mission, to develop this hotline to support divers. So in 1981, we launched the hotline, and the number of calls tripled. So the industry loved what we were doing. Before, they were calling Duke University or Dr. Jeff Davis in Brooks Air Force Base, and they were somehow feeling guilty because, well, my friend is bent, but I need to help him. I know I'm going to be calling, a hospital and asking someone to help me, desperate. So they were feeling guilty by committing resources and actually Air Force resources, and we're not there for that. So when we announced to the industry, listen, call this number, we're here for you, people said, please do. So the number of calls tripled. Not all those calls were eventually emergency calls. Not all those calls were about someone having symptoms. Sometimes it was someone having, questions about diving physics, physiology, fitness to dive inquiries, say, I'm asthmatic, can I dive, and so on. So in 1981, we launched the medical information line, which is another line that we have for non-emergencies, medical questions, but not emergencies. So in 1982, we did the first CME course. CME is continuing medical education. In the US, doctors, to keep up with the license, they need to do the courses, and those courses, they need to have accreditation so that every X number of hours you can submit to your board, and eventually you renew your license. So we've been offering that course since 1982. I have the privilege to be the course director for that now, and it's an honor. It's fantastic. It's the longest standing course of its kind. There's no other like it. In 1983, we launched the membership. So remember that I said we had $269,000, and that was enough for 2 years. So actually the first Dan employee was Chris Wackos, and Chris was a nurse from Milwaukee. He was a diver, and when he found out what was going on, he went to his boss and he says, I want to meet Dr. Bennett. I want to work with him. So Chris was actually my first boss at Dan. He came up with the idea of, listen, Dr. Bennett, people love what we're doing. We need to have find a way to sustain ourselves long term. So what if we reach out to the industry and we let them know, hey, do you like what we're doing? If you support what we're doing, consider donating $10 to us a year, and you can become a member, a supporter of our organization. And the industry's response was, shut up and take my money. So in no time, we saw ourselves with, I think in 3 months, with $18,000, which was fantastic. So we seem to have something that works here. People love what we're doing, so let's continue doing it. So that's about the time where we actually changed the name with the help of John Cronin and Dennis Graver from Patty. They recommended the powers to be to say, let's not just call it Accident Network, let's just call it Divers Alert Network. So, marketing, they thought it was better. In 1984, we actually phased out that money and eventually started, running on membership money, membership dollars. So in 1987, we saw the need to help divers afford treatments. Back in those days, diving was, and somehow it's still considered a high-risk activity, and some insurance companies would not pay for treatment. So, and especially if you were overseas, they were saying, listen, I'm not going to pay for this in the US. Now you're in Cayman. Well, good luck with you, but I'm not going to pay for those treatments. So in 1990, the IRS granted us a 501c3 category, and eventually we moved off campus because we outgrew the space we had at the chamber at the unit at Duke University. So we occupied 2 floors in that building, which is actually 100 yards away from the office now. And that building belongs to the university. And we moved there until we found a better place to eventually build our headquarters. In 1991, we introduced what we now call as Dan Travel Assist benefits. So when you become a member of our organization, there are some benefits that come with your membership. And some of those, we call them travel assistance benefits. So if you're traveling, say, in Europe and you lost your passport, well, we can help you with that. Not necessarily ourselves, but Dan as an organization, we can help you with that. If you have an injury that has nothing to do with diving and you need to be moved from where the injury happened, not from the field, but from the closest hospital to another hospital with a higher level of care, we can help you with that. And that is a benefit that comes from your membership, not from your insurance. So those are the benefits for Dan members. Those same years, this is when we started a research project, which is flying after diving. How many of you know that you have some restrictions to fly after diving, right? So you've heard of that. So do you know where that came from? That is research done. Okay. In 1992, we launched a medical evacuation. In 1993, we actually offered a dive accident insurance because, like we said before, we saw that we needed to help divers afford treatments. So we created an insurance company to pay for treatments when the primary insurance would not pay and when you were overseas. So you see how this is evolving. So insurance is what we do to make a living these days, but it's not necessarily who we are. In 1995, we launched Project Dive Exploration. It was probably the most ambitious dive project, research project in diving medicine ever. We had the intention of compiling 1 million dives and seeing how many times people got bent on those million dives. When you want to know how many cases of any given disease are, you need a denominator, right? Well, what we don't have in diving is a denominator. We know how many cases we have per year, but we don't know over how many successful dives. So the closest way to get an idea on what is our denominator was, let's study 1 million dives and see how many of those dives resulted in decompression sickness. In 1999, we launched our internship program. So we have interns at Dan every summer, and we help them, find their way if they have an interest in diving medicine, in diving sciences, and we support them. We bring them to the office, we host them, we give them food, everything, and they spend 3 months with us. And usually they participate in a research project that they can publish. And hopefully when they kickstart their career, they already have a publication in a scientific journal. So we have had over 150 interns so far, and we invested well over $1 million on them. In 2002, we moved off campus. That's our building now. We have about 60 staff members. So we can say that Dr. Charles Schilling and Dr. Jeff Davis, Morgan Wells, and James Miller, they are our founding fathers. And we were born at Duke University. Now, this guy you see here, that was Joel Dovenberger, he's still alive. He's a nurse. He was the second Dan employee. He was my second boss at Dan. And here you see him taking calls in the late 80s and, taking an emergency call and making notes of what was going on. Because every time we have a call, we document everything just to make sure that we can study what happened in later. So the emergency hotline is a remarkable observatory. It's a way to keep a finger in the pulse as to what is going on in the industry. Remember when we had, during COVID, we were looking into, well, how many beds we have in ICU to see how bad the pandemic is going. So this is in a similar way, when we see a steady trend, we know that the industry is relatively healthy because we see the same number of cases. If we see something off, that catches our attention and we try to pay attention to what is going on here, right? So a few years ago, I noticed what seemed to be a relative high frequency of cases of pulmonary trauma, lung overexpansion injury in minors. So we did a study and we looked back into how many cases we have over a period of time, and we analyzed what happened with those kids. And then eventually we published a scientific paper to tell back the industry, this is what we found, this is lessons learned, this is how we can make things hopefully a little bit better. So with all that information we get from the hotline, we do epidemiological research. We compile all that information and we analyze them in different cohorts. So we've been doing this since 1980. Every time we get a case, we document everything, we do follow-ups, and eventually we find out what happened and we put it in a database so that later on we can study those cases and analyze them. So we started publishing these reports in 1987. Now, back in those days when Dan started in 1980, everything was, call notes and pen and paper. So not great to do, a retrospective study. Between 87 to 97, we started to, fill out some forms in like a spreadsheet to be able to analyze them better. Still not great. Between 97 to 2006, we perfected that, and that's when we started to eventually digitalize the analyzed data. And ever since 2006, we developed our own software, which is something similar to an electronic medical record, where we document everything and we can analyze it much, much better. So the first report that you see from 1987, it says, at the inception of Dan in 1980, the charge placed upon the organization was primarily threefold: to provide assistance to injured divers, hotline, to collect statistics on diving casualties, and to provide information regarding health issues pertaining scuba diving and the general public and physicians. So ever since 2006, since we have this system, these are the number of cases we document in our system. You can see that initially in 2006, we had about 6,000 cases in just 1 year. And it has been fairly steady over the years. Of course, we write off those years in COVID. So these are the number of new records, okay, in our system. Now, every case eventually generates multiple calls. We don't just talk to them once and hang up and never see them again. We call them back to see how they're doing, how things are improving. So we make multiple follow-up calls. And these are the number of follow-up calls we make every year. So you see that we really engage. We don't just listen to you. We call you back and we want to know what happened until the cows come home. So when you stack up the number of cases and the number of follow-ups, those are the number of interactions we have every year. So you can see it's a pretty significant number. So every year we publish the results of those epidemiological studies and aggregate data as to what is going on with the industry. And this has been an industry reference for many, many years. So like I was saying before, you know what that is, right? Flying after diving guidelines. So where do they come from? Spontaneous generation? No. That is research Dan did. We actually spent 9 years trying to answer that question. And we spent over $4 million just to answer that question. Now, the results of that are used by everybody, US Navy, and actually the navies and armed forces of every country that is known to humankind. So what we do is pretty significant. So eventually we publish those results in scientific journals, and eventually this is together with US Navy, by the way, not just Dan, and with funding also from Patty. And we present the procedures. So how many of you know about diabetics? Can diabetics dive? They can, right? It's not an absolute contraindication. It's what we call a relative contraindication. Depending on how things are, you can or you can't. So how do we know that? Dan's research. Have any of you heard about what a PFO is? A patent foramen ovale. So we know that this could be a problem, and there's some cases where you want to fix it, some others where you don't, and the procedure has some risks. So how do we know that? We did another workshop for that. And we did workshops on fatalities. And if you go to our website, you're going to find we did many, many workshops, and everything we do is online because the money that we make, we reinvest it back into dive safety, and we put it back to you. So when we started the hotline in 1980, everything was, of course, in English. Now, the guy with the funny accent, when I was brought to the US in 2007, the reason I was brought was, well, I speak Spanish, and because I worked in Brazil, I also speak some Portuguese. So that is 3 of the 4 languages in the US. So we started having, more outreach and not just be US-centric. In 2014, eventually we opened a new hotline specifically for Portuguese too. And in 2022, we also opened hotlines specifically for Indonesia and Malaysia, where you pick up the phone and your call is going to be answered in local language beginning to end. We can't expect someone to call the US and speak English to get help. So we launched these individual hotlines in different countries. So we have agents all over the world. We have most of us in the US, in North Carolina, where we handle English, Spanish, and Portuguese. We have people in Brazil, in Mexico, in Hawaii, in South Africa, in Indonesia, in New Zealand, even one in Iceland. We have a doctor in Iceland that answers calls in Spanish for us. So when I started at Dan, you are on call. So it's a 9-to-5 job. So 9 to 5, you're in the office, and then after 5, one of us was the sacrificial lamb and had to be on call for the next, 16 hours until the next morning. So that meant, you are proactive this many hours in the office, and then after hours, we were, reactive to someone calling you after hours. And listen, there's so much you actually love divers when you're awake in the middle of the night 3-5 times. Eventually, you just burn out. So that wasn't the best scenario either, right? I mean, we're very active and engaged 8 hours, and then the next 16, kind of reactive. And if you put that in the whole week and in the whole, weekends, it was a lot of time. Most of the time, we were reactive. So it wasn't the best, and it was taking a toll on us. So what we did was, let's divide the 24 hours in 3 8-hour shifts. So eventually I said, we can do, 8 hours from Dan in North Carolina, and then we can pass along the next following hours into other parts of the world where people can be taking calls in an office setting, full daylight, fully awake, fully functional, with all the resources available to them. So we have medics now in different parts of the world. And so what happens is, if you call 9 to 5 Eastern time, your call will be answered in the US. If you call 5 p.m. until 1 a.m., your call will be answered in New Zealand. And then from 1 a.m. until 8 a.m., your call will be answered in South Africa. Okay, so that's why depending on the call, you will hear different accents. And this is the office we have in New Zealand, where you see, pretty nice, neat, and tidy with those big screens. And those big screens are what we have. If you ever have a chance to be in North Carolina, by all means, stop by. We'll be happy to show you the call center. So if you go to the call center, we have these 3 big screens, and one of those is just the phone system, and the other 2 are, I'll explain to you now. So these is usually, actually, the screen in our office looks something like this. So we have every single case that we have open at any given time in the US, in anywhere in the world. You see those columns as AUPT, so that's the country. So US, Japan, Portugal, US, Mexico, Indonesia, Australia. So we know what is going on. We know who opened the case, when was the case opened, who did the last update, and when was the last update. So you see red, yellow, and green. So a green case is a case with low priority. So we want to have an update every at least 24 hours. If the case is yellow, we want to have an update, it's a medium priority. We want to have an update every 16 hours. And if it's red, high priority, every 8 hours, we want to be engaged. Of course, we want the screen to look like this, with everything up to date. Now, the other screen you see is we have a map, and we know exactly where those cases are happening. So we have a green case, so we know that's a low priority. A red case, we have an F over there in Borneo, that's a fatality, okay? And you see that cast, that shadow over there, that's night in the world. So by each one of these call centers having this, we know where is night. So we know where not to call to do a follow-up, right? So at this point in time, if I'm calling that F, that fatality, or any of those cases in Philippines, that's fine. That's still evening, right? Now that case in the Caribbean, that's probably too early for them. So that's how we plan and organize when to call them back. So like I said before, it's a remarkable observatory, and the way we engage is we are available for consultation, okay? On diving emergencies, on fitness dive inquiries, on diving physiology. And like I said before, we take calls from all over the world. Most of the callers are people like you, lay people, not medical professionals. About 70% of the calls we get are from people having symptoms in the field. And 30% are actually doctors evaluating these divers. So when the caller is a layperson, someone like you, we want to calibrate to who you are, right? We're not going to be giving you technical terms and explaining things in much detail, because that's not for you. So we will ask you enough questions to have a fairly good idea on what is going on. And our job is to try to turn you into a patient, someone's patient. When we have someone in the field with symptoms, they're not a patient, right? They're an injured person. You become a patient when you're in front of a doctor or medical personnel, and the doctor lays eyes on you and says, "Sir, how can I help you?" At that moment in time, operationally and legally, you're establishing a doctor-patient relationship, right? That's when you become a patient. So our job, we cannot be your doctor on the phone. Our job is to turn you into a patient. Whose patient? Someone's patient, wherever you happen to be. Usually what we get back is, well, the doctors here don't know anything about diving. I know, but we do. They can be our eyes, they can be our hands. We can ask them what they see, and we can give them our 2 cents so that he can make the best decisions for you, okay? So eventually we say, listen, based on what you say, it seems like this condition, say decompression sickness, is likely or unlikely, and why, right? And then we say, listen, having said that, we recommend you seek medical evaluation, right? So that interaction with me is just a recommendation. I'm not there to say what is going on. You could be calling me for numbness in your pinky finger that is not going to give me a hard time, and you don't tell me that one of the pupils of your eyes is larger than the other one. If I don't see that, I can't give recommendations on that, right? If I don't know that your reflexes are abnormal, we miss that. So that's why we need you to be in the hands of a doctor so that they can evaluate you, and we can help this doctor put things together. So that's not the best scenario. The best scenario is when we actually talk to the doctor, the one that is evaluating you. Now, the same way, we cannot tell you, listen, move aside, this is what you need to do. Doctors don't like that. So if we say, listen, doc, based on what you say. Now, the good thing is now I ask him questions and he can tell me objectively what they see. When I ask them, did you do a neuro exam? Yes. Did you find anything? No. Did you check this? Yes. Did you check this? Yes. Did you check this? No. Well, go check it. So once we have everything, we say, listen, same way, based on what you say, it seems like this condition is likely or unlikely. Then we can be more technical with them and explain to them our thought process, hoping that we can persuade them to seek, to steer you in the right direction. So what we never did is we don't admit patients into facilities. We don't have patients under our care. We have no medical facilities. We don't prescribe treatments. We don't direct patient care, medical evaluation, diagnostic procedures. That is all in the hands of the local doctor over there. And there is no doctor-patient relation between us and somebody calling the hotline. So the best we can do is when we talk to this doctor is we can either help them recalibrate their thought process or eventually confirm it and steer the case in the right direction. Now, when you are in an ER and you're a doctor and somebody walks through that door and you see that he or she is a 50s, might in his 50s and 60s, and he's rather chubby, probably not in the best shape, and he's coming in and he's pale and sweaty, and he's holding his arm on his hand on his chest. So I have a lot of information and I did not exchange a word, right? And once he's here, I can prioritize between all of you, you're fine, and that guy seems like about to have a heart attack. I can prioritize him and say, come here. Now I can talk with you, I can exchange words, I can touch you, I can use my stethoscope, I can use my hands, I can order labs. You have all your resources. On the hotline, we don't have direct contact with you. So our only clinical tool is this, right? And what lies in between them, right? How we put things together. So we always have to be cognizant about that because we're always walking a very fine line between being useful and at the same time being helpful. The safest thing to do would be to say, I don't know, go see a doctor, bye-bye. Well, what good are you for? I mean, what's your help? So, but navigating that line between giving you good recommendations and not crossing the line with telemedicine is delicate, right? So the United States of America is actually another country, it's a union of states, and each state is its own universe, and medicine is governed by state, right? Now, if you put that internationally, I mean, a license, I don't have a US license because I don't treat patients in the US, because I don't need to, right? Now, let's say that I had a US license. Well, the license would be in North Carolina. What good is a license in North Carolina with a diver from California diving in Tennessee? Now, put that into what good is a North Carolina license or any US license when you have an Indonesian diver diving in Brazil? So that's why we always need to keep that very fine line and be cautious on what we say, how we say it, and how we engage. So everybody knows what a poison control center is. So think about that as that poison control center. Now, with the advancement of technology, we're now facing different challenges. Before, years ago, when you were diving, say, in Bikini Atoll, you were on your own, right? So you're not expecting anybody to help you if you're diving in Bikini Atoll because you can't communicate with anybody. But now everybody has Starlink, so they can call us. So now the expectation is I'm going to call you and you're going to tell me what to do. And eventually, because I have done insurance, you're going to evacuate me from the middle of nowhere. That is, it's a challenge. So that's our office, right? And the way I explain this is, listen, if you're diving on an island on a liveaboard and you surface and you have symptoms, usually what people do is they say, well, no worries, we'll call Dan. They'll fix it. Wait a minute. I mean, I'm limited. I don't know what I can do if you can't even find a diver. But so there are some things that should be owned, by the dive operation. So if you call the ambulance is only going to get there. They're not going to get to the island where you are. So you first need to bring the diver on board. You need to do something on board, right? And then you need to bring the diver to the point where EMS can pick them up, right? So that is what we call, that is the rescue. We don't do rescues, right? We eventually do a medical evacuation. And that is from the point where you become a patient. So from a medical facility to another medical facility that may have a chamber or whatever you need, right? But so that part, that is the medical evacuation. That's what we can do. And eventually we can fly you to wherever you need to be. But we're not going to fly you from the dive site to the hospital. That's a rescue. So that's our building before. So what you see here, this never happened. Okay? We don't have a Dan helicopter. So please plan well. We're working on it. Hold on. We're working on it, but we're not there yet. So just hold on. But so anyway, joke aside, we're here to help you. If you ever have a case or any symptoms you may not understand, by all means, call us 24/7. You can talk to one of us. We're here to help. This is what we've been doing for 45 years. Now you know, hopefully I explained to you who we are and how we came to be. You know, as a doctor, people ask you, so where do you work? Usually my answer starts with a sigh. It's complicated. So we try to explain them, listen, I mean, it's like a poison control center, but it's something in between the AAA and the Red Cross for divers. It's complicated. So we try to, pass that along to you. We are this safety organization. Yes, we sell insurance, and most of you probably have insurance with us. Thank you. That is what keeps our lights on. But we're much more than that. Okay. And as you can see, we have we have had the privilege of counting with exceptional people over the years, some of which have been my mentors. So everything that me and many others have learned is to put it back to you. We're divers helping divers. All right. That's all I had. Preguntas? Yes.
What can we do as dive instructors to better advocate for Dan insurance? Does anything new come out or anything we should know about?
So what can you do as dive instructors to help support Dan?
And advocate divers having insurance?
Well, so one thing is, just putting our name out there and letting people know, let the new generations of divers know that they can count on this organization, that our reason to exist is to support diving safety, and just take them to our website and have them see the many, many programs we have and the many things we have done over the years, over the decades, to help support a healthy growth of diving worldwide. That should be enough to say, this is the kind of organization that I'm willing to support, and the rest will come.
I don't have a question, but I'd just like to provide a testimony because Dan saved my life. And when I called them from Madagascar after having a diving accident in the Seychelles, the immediate response was over the phone from a hospital in Madagascar. The response was, we need to get an air ambulance to you. It will take 24 or 36 hours. Dan covered the cost of getting me airlifted from Dan covered the cost of getting me airlifted from Madagascar to Mozambique to Johannesburg, where 16 years ago I had a quadruple bypass. It was the result of a heart attack while diving. And I was so impressed with the reaction. Stephen Frink, who's here this evening, published an article that I wrote called Dan Saved My Life, and they did. And so I'm here because I wanted to meet someone in person that represents Dan. I thank you for your excellent presentation. And if there's anyone in the audience who does not have Dan insurance, it's not expensive, and they covered the cost. Absolutely, no questions asked. I was able to get reimbursement from my United Healthcare or whatever my private insurance was. But in any case, thank you for your wonderful presentation. And I support you and Dan in every way, because
Thank you.
you did save my life.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that this is not paid advertisement. But this is one of the many testimonials we have, and we can do this because of people like you that support our industry and support our mission. Once we support the mission, we are able to, bring people back to safety when things are needed. I'm happy that you're good. Yes.
Out here in the real world, most doctors that you go to are not divers. And they say, oh, well, you're 80 years old now, you shouldn't dive. Or they say, oh, you've had this, you should. What I say is contact Dan, ask them to refer you to a diving physician, and they can help you really understand if it's a valid point, because whatever the issue is, but they can guide you on should you dive, and by getting you to a diving physician. And do you still do that? Because I'm sending a lot of people to that, and I hope you still do.
Yeah, every single day we get questions like that. People like you that sometimes, doctors give personal opinions, right? So you shouldn't be diving. Well, age alone is not necessarily a contraindication, right? The thing is, with age, we sometimes carry other comorbidities, and those are the ones that could be problematic, right? But so age alone is not going to increase your risk of decompression sickness or to die. Again, there's a correlation, not necessarily causation. So when we age, when we have a really high BMI, that comes with other comorbidities, and those are the ones that could be a problem. So each case should be addressed individually. In medicine, we say we don't have diseases. We have people with a disease. Each case is its own universe.
The other question was over here.
I'm curious how you're responding to new technologies like apps and text. Do I really need to call you on the phone?
So the question is if we really need to call you to get help. Unfortunately, so far, yes. We've been battling with the idea of having a chat service. There are technical limitations that we're trying to circumvent, but a text message is something that has the potential to eventually become abused significantly and overload our systems. And also the type of engagement, the two-way communication is sometimes not the best. Sometimes you have people that, they say 2 words and they hit send, and 2 words and send. And you have others that they write a manuscript. And then you have, you're waiting for someone for 5 minutes to give you the manuscript. And when you read it, it's all useless information. So engaging in that sense is not the best. I think if you have a case, if you're symptomatic following a dive, just call. It's better, much more fluent. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you see a difference between recreational divers and technical divers with DCS?
If we see a difference between technical divers and recreational divers in terms of DCS, I would say that perhaps because of the type of diving they do, it's inherently riskier for tech divers. So, and I'm trying to remember the reference, but I think there's an article that's, listen, the information we have is not the best, so the evidence we have is not the best, but it could potentially be a slightly larger increase or higher prevalence of DCS among technical divers. It's not just about being a technical diver, it's the type of diving you do, right? Yeah.
So I do have a couple questions that I'm going to ask from Zoom. Robert asks, how many staff and what qualifications do they need to run a hyperbaric chamber for bent divers?
So in terms of how many staff, well, the minimum number of people you need is you need a doctor. You need at least 1 or 2 technicians. One of those ideally being a nurse or, a DMT, a diver medical technician. and an operator. Now, I don't know where he's coming from, but most chambers in the US, except for two, except for the chamber in Catalina and the chamber in Pacific Grove in LA, all the chambers, they don't live off of divers. They do clinical hyperbaric medicine. So trying to, start a business and I have a chamber, I'm going to put it to use. No, you're not going to go far. But yeah, what you need is, of course, you need a doctor. And every year we get at least, I would say, 2 or 3 calls about someone saying, listen, I'm a former Navy diver. I'm in, an island near Guam, and there's a chamber here. And just to let you know, we can run it. I've been doing this for 40 years. And great. Do you have a doctor? No, but I've been doing this. If you don't have a doctor, what you have is a paperweight, but I can't use your chamber. Right? I mean, a chamber is a medical device, and it has to be, the prescription has to come from a doctor. You can run a treatment table 6 safely, and that's fine. But if anything goes south, not because you did something wrong, because sometimes, things go sideways. If anything goes south, you don't have defense. So, it's a delicate thing. It's many times people think that I can do this, but the moment a diver has symptoms, they become a patient, and that treatment has to be prescribed by a doctor.
So one more question from Zoom was Dottie. She wanted to know what the symptoms of aviation decompression sickness would be. So if you're in a plane after diving and you get bent, what would the
so that's a
symptoms?
different thing. So flying after diving getting bent because you flew before time is different than eventually aviation decompression sickness. In terms of aviation decompression sickness, usually the manifestations are rather mild compared to what they can be in diving. Usually the manifestations are more in the lines of, joint pains and numbness and tingling, but it's, unless there's a catastrophic decompression in the aircraft, they're not going to be that dramatic. And the treatment is, of course, the pilots, they go on oxygen and the crew go on oxygen, and they try to land the plane. By landing the plane, you're essentially coming to sea level, so you're recompressing them, right? And in terms of when you're flying following a dive, usually the manifestations, they can be similar, perhaps, more on the neurological side, the numbness and tingling. They are usually not catastrophic. I have never heard or read even anecdotal reports of someone, having a horrible case because they flew very early on. This is not to say that I would recommend doing it, of course not. But sometimes it happens.
I don't know if this is true or just something I've heard rumored that the most chambers are in Colorado, which is like, and it's not necessarily for diving chambers. This is like for health people that have, is that not the case? And are these just chambers that are good for, people getting oxygenated and medical, like not, just, for feel good kind of stuff? Or do you know much about that rumor?
In the US, the largest number of chambers is actually in Florida.
In Florida?
Yeah. Because Florida is unique in many ways, let me tell you. We always say the UHMS, the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society, we accept 14 indications for hyperbaric medicine. And then there are the Florida indications, where you have lots of off-label indications like wellness and, there's no evidence for that. So don't fall in that trap. You're not going to get any younger. You're not going to get any healthier. You're only, I'm not talking to you. I'm just talking in general. You're only going to become poorer. Yeah.
Other questions in the back, Angela?
This is just being curious, but there were 5 divers. They died at the Maldives, Indian Ocean, and it was someone from then that it was also involved in the rescue, finding the diver that went down the cave. Have you heard? Have they have come to some conclusion? What happened to this? What was the involvement?
I'll feel that. So,
Here, Cliff.
a couple of things. One, we don't know what happened. I don't think we may never know exactly what happened. I do know that the Finnish team that went down have recovered all 4 divers. So they got the first diver that they found initially. Then the rescue diver who later passed on at the hospital, obviously, and then the 4 divers were recovered, 2 the day before yesterday, and I think 2 earlier today. What a lot of people don't know is that endeavor really started. We can't take credit for it. It started out of Dan Europe. So we are 2 separate companies. We both have the same mission. We support each other with resources, but we both have different operational and governance structures. We're super proud of what Laura and her team were able to put together by contacting the Finnish team and getting them in the country, because that is a huge lift and endeavor. Just being able to get the resources, the country clearances, and working with a foreign government to do a very high risk recovery. So, and I know the team will. There's a lot of interest in what went wrong. That'll all be analyzed. We don't know if there was environmental conditions, bad planning. We just don't know. So I know there's a lot of speculation. A lot of people want to know. The best thing that we can say is, like you learn in your very first open water class, dive to your training, and just because you're qualified to dive doesn't mean that you're ready to take on every challenge. Because if you learn to dive in a quarry, the environment is much different than you go into the Gulf or into the Atlantic Ocean. You dive in the Keys, you go to the Pacific Ocean, completely different diving environments. So I'm really big on continuing education, which means if I'm going to dive in California, I might want to take a class in a local area, a refresher course, or an intro to the environment with a guided dive master, so that I'm prepared to dive in the environment that I'm diving. And always, always, always follow what you're trying to do.
Okay, we have another question back here. We're going to take a few more. We're going to be around for a little bit, but we're going to wrap it up for those of you who want to go to dinner or something.
Yes, I'm wondering, you have 3 languages for your call centers. Why don't you have more, like French? Or I would think there are a lot of people who speak other languages, like maybe in Asia. I was going to ask that too. You're working on that.
Oh, no, trust me. I mean, with AI,
He needs
there's
that.
a lot of things that it can open up. But thank you. It's not something that happens overnight. It requires identifying the people, committing financial resources, because eventually, once you start, you can't just say you have 2 people answering a hotline. If you're going to be there 24/7, you need to have enough people, and you can't have 2 people 24/7. So there's finding the human resources. There is committing the financial resources, because resources are limited. Needs are endless, but resources are limited. And then eventually there's training. There's supervision. There's a lot of moving parts. But yes, we're working on that, definitely.
Last question.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I apologize. My phone rang, but I have to answer the phone because my son's epileptic, and so I was a former instructor, and I've asked, for the last 40 years, has there been anything done for epileptics? And the answer is always, you can't dive, and it developed on him when he was in his teens. And he's 26 years old now. Is there anything that Dan is doing to do any type of research? And then the second question before you answer, and probably the answer is no, but the second question is, does Dan do any audits to make sure that dive operations are following best practices?
That's a loaded question.
Putting us on the spot there. So the first one, can epileptics dive? Listen, there are very few of what we call absolute contraindications. And unfortunately, someone with a diagnosis of epilepsy is considered, has been considered, and probably should continue to be considered an absolute contraindication. Now, someone having a seizure doesn't mean that they're epileptic, right? Now, this most likely you know this, but I'm just letting people know because sometimes, you know, they may think that I have a friend that had a seizure. So having a history of seizures is not necessarily an absolute contraindication. Now, epilepsy, unfortunately, it is. And sometimes this clashes with, you know, the recommendation from the physician that says, oh, you can have a normal life. Fine, but diving shouldn't be considered part of normal life, right? We're working beyond design specifications. So, and the risk with someone with a diagnosis of epilepsy is while you're underwater, there are many things that could be and should be considered potentially epileptogenic stimuli. So stimulus that will potentially trigger a seizure. Sometimes those stimuli can be emotions. You can have strong emotions, particularly as you start diving, you know, fear, anxiety, and so on. So that can trigger a seizure. Sometimes light, you know, light patterns. And if there's something that changes underwater is, you know, light patterns, disorientation, psychological stress, spatial orientation, you know, when you move around and eventually, you know, your semicircular canals in your ears, they start moving around. So all those things can potentially trigger a seizure on someone with a predisposition, which is someone with epilepsy. Now, if you happen to seize while walking down the street, well, it's not fun. You know, seizing has a risk, and eventually you may fall and hit your head. But while diving, if you seize, chances of you eventually drowning are exceptionally high. So I love diving, and we all do, but there's nothing down there worth dying for. That's why the recommendation is someone that has that diagnosis. The recommendation is you should not be diving. Now, can someone with a history of epilepsy or a seizure disorder, because actually the contraindication is not necessarily a seizure disorder, sorry, epilepsy, it's a seizure disorder, and eventually any conditions that might make someone have a sudden loss of consciousness. So syncopal episodes, that's not a seizure. But if you have a syncopal episode underwater, you pass out, you black out, and you're going to drown, right? Now, someone with a seizure disorder, be epilepsy or others, can they dive in the future? The current recommendation is once you're free of medication, once your doctor says, listen, you no longer need medication, your electroencephalogram is fine, and we've been waving you off of the medication, and we can discontinue this. So from that moment in time, we start counting, and the recommendation varies. Some experts say 5 years, some experts say 3 years. So 3 years, the least conservative. So 3 years, free of medication and free of seizures during those 3 years. Then we can say, okay, let's see. Doesn't mean automatically yes. Then we can say, let's have a conversation and see if you're fit to die. Does that answer your question pretty much?
One of the, not only do we have the membership that they talked about, we didn't even go into the questions on, I got stung by a lionfish or any of the undersea environmental issues that could happen. One I'm bringing tonight, actually, Stephen Frank, our publisher. This is Alert Diver magazine. It comes out quarterly, and it has just phenomenal, you know, for those of you that are divers, there's a lot of dive that have like 90% ads and a few things sprinkled in. This is not like that. This is an educational magazine. It has a plethora of educational and just wonderful articles. I will reference an old one that actually is the art of diving history that was done 2023, but you know, it really focused on where we're at today and the diving history. So thank you very much. This was another great one. But and the instructors that are in the room, or if you're not an instructor, if you are joining in, there's the student application.
Mhm.
That while the student is going through their pool class and their checkout dives, they can get familiar with what Dan does. And then after they graduate, they can continue on and decide if they want to. And I always say, if you can afford a boat trip, you can afford Dan, because something could happen on that first boat trip. And, you know, diving is just a precious thing. I am a cheerleader for Dan, but diving safety is what we really want to promote. So thank you very much for being here. And as a thank you, your boss may not like it, but you have an annual membership that is good for 362 days.
Thank you so much.
And our Try Pressure t-shirt.
I saw you with that and I was like, I'm gonna get them. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll make sure that you both get that because it is very, you know, very good for your.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our member, Hal Burton, who for our exhibit cutting tonight created some special brew for us. So we have a Dr. Brower and a partial pressure brew for our little member mingle and exhibit cutting. So thank you very much, Hal, for gracing us with your beverages. Thank you all for coming. We hope that you become members and volunteers and we get to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.